Welcome to our Composable Banking Vodcast by Sili Solutions. In this vodcast, we're exploring what it takes to build future-proof financial services. In today's episode, we're joined by Mikko Ayub and Erik Åkesson from BearingPoint's to discuss legacy. What it actually is, where it shows up, and why it matters now more than ever. Drawing on insights from their recent white paper, we'll look at how banks can identify their optimal rate of change, separate transformation from day-to-day operations, and take practical steps to turn legacy from a constraint into a catalyst of growth. Let's get started. Everyone's chasing future ready. But what if the biggest blocker is the past you never unpacked? So, what really is legacy?
We define legacy to be the situation you are in because of the history you have. Organizations, companies, they are not where they are just by random. There is a path that they have followed to land where they are, and that is their history. There's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad, and it is what it is. So that is the legacy that they carry. The situation you are in because of the history you have.
I think it's important to also remember that legacy can be positive. For example, a king would want to be remembered for something great. So what you will be remembered for can also be a way to define legacy. But here in the context of banking, we look at it predominantly from the build-up of things over time and how to deal with that.
Oh, how about, is legacy more dangerous because it's invisible?
It is, and that's why we feel it is important to remind people and to remind organizations about the existence of legacy. We actually classify legacy into 4 different baskets. There is technological legacy, so all the systems that one has. That is the easiest legacy to understand because it can be assigned a price tag, how much it takes to be replaced and renewed. But then there is operational legacy or organizational legacy. Things are done in a certain way because they have been always done that way. At some point in time, it probably made sense. But then as time passed, like we know, very few organizations design their processes and operations from scratch to see, is this what we need today? So there's a lot of operational legacy. Then there is cultural legacy. That is easy to understand, I believe. But then it's good to keep in mind that we all carry psychological legacy, our personal legacy. Some of us are risk takers. Some want to avoid risk. Some like to lead. Some like to follow. And understanding that is important. So 4 baskets of legacy: technological, operational, cultural, and psychological.
And to come with some examples on that, often the operational and the cultural can sort of be intertwined. Now I'll come with an example of that. So often in banks, it is not so that the process is sort of simply stupid for no good reason at all. Nobody set out for that to be the case. It was often fit for purpose at a different time when things were different. And then you would digitalize your processes step by step. And after some time, you still do things that are fit for a certain purpose back in the day, but it's no longer. I can give sometimes it helps to give very mundane examples. I know of a couple that moved together, a boy and a girl, and they were going to do a steak, an oven steak. And then the girl said, we need to cut the corners of this steak. And the guy asked why, and she said, well, my mom did it that way, so that's what we're going to do. The guy was very wise. He wanted to stay married, and so he said, okay, so you do. And then they asked the mom, why do we cut the steak corners? And she said, well, my oven tray is too small, so we have to. And there you see, if that mother had died before they asked, this woman would have taught maybe her kids to do the same. That's process legacy in the building. It was for a good reason in another situation that then carried over. And that kind of stuff happens in every corporate. So the question is, how many stakes do you have in your corporate?
Coming back to your question of, is it dangerous because it cannot be observed so well? I would take the example of radiation. There's a lot of radiation everywhere. It's fine if it is in controllable amounts, But if it is large in quantity or if you are exposed for an excessive period of time, it can be lethal. And I think the same goes with legacy in organizations. It is everywhere, we have to live with it, but in large amounts or over an extended period of time, it can be really dangerous for corporates.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I think about also legacy, I've been in places where you can actually see legacy affecting clients in organizations, which is one of the worst case scenarios that you want to actually have in your organization, that your clients spot out something that is very, very weird, and it's due to some legacy systems, legacy processes that pretty much don't make sense anymore at this time, for example.
I completely agree. I think we as consumers have faced in different contexts situations where on an internet page or a mobile application you are actually filling in information that you really think that the counterparty should be possessing. And then you ask yourself, why am I in this process of re-giving information that you already have in your databases? Well, the reason is that there is technological legacy and it does not serve purpose today anymore to the extent to make the user experience as smooth as possible for us as consumers.
Indeed. I guess many people have actually bumped into those kind of situations, but you might recognize it only as a bad customer experience. Or then if you contact the customer service, the response might be that, okay, we have this old legacy system and this is why things don't work in the way that you expect to.
Exactly.
Which is not, of course, good for your brand, perhaps. How about if we think about legacy in banks? Where does it hide in the financial corporations?
Technological legacy is something that is very much focal and very much topical, and that is where there is a lot of legacy. Banks started, or the financial industry started to digitalize before the word even existed. So we go back several decades to see the initial steps of digitalization. Now, when these systems and processes are built in layers over multiple decades, then it is obvious that there is going to be a lot of legacy, and connectivity between these different systems is not that in what it would be in a digital native company. So that is clearly an area of legacy. Operational legacy is another thing that I think the financial industry carries in a sort of negative sense, because what happened when digitalization initiated or took place in the early decades of digitalization, manual processes were made digital or computerized, and they didn't really become redesigned to fit all the capabilities that technology, even decades back, could have provided. So that is something that the industry needs to deal with as per today now.
I think there is another sort of positive legacy that has a negative effect. And we will get back to that in a later episode about other industries, because the airlines have a similar thing. In the airlines, it is paramount to always be safe. So safety culture rules everything. And that has a spillover effect in other parts of their organization. Banks have something similar. For anyone, and I have done 20 years of banking or so, Mikko has done maybe 30, 35. As all bankers know, compliance culture rules everything, and that's good. We want banks to be compliant. Credit is another thing that rules a lot of things. Essentially, you can never do anything without having approval by credit. So credit and compliance is paramount, because you don't want to break any laws and you don't want to lend money to somebody that doesn't pay back. That leads to a very sort of a rigid mindset that has the spillover effect that is very difficult to ask people to be sort of thinking on the fly, fail fast, and all these things that the startups do. It is simply not in their cultural backbone. For a good reason. It has this negative spillover effect. It's very hard to ask a guy Monday morning to be compliant with every rule, and then in the afternoon tell him to fail fast and be a little bit innovative. That hampers innovation in banking.
I think that's a very interesting point and an important point. If we listen to the narrative in today's corporate world, fail fast is something that is repeated quite often. Now, this is not really what you have in a bank. You would hope it to persist and exist in certain areas, non-critical areas. But then again, there is this conflict of running two separate cultures. One can fail fast and should try. The other should actually never fail. And fitting these together is a challenge. But this fail fast culture is not really something that you would say in the financial industry. You know, I'm going to start a new bank. I'll try this fail fast type of culture. We might go for 3-4 years. It either flies or then we are going to fail. That's not really how you start a bank.
Yeah, and then also there's these repeated cycles of hardship every 10 years or so. There's a financial crisis. And running a bank a little bit crazy and fail fast, that usually works as long as things are good. But then comes the next crisis and they are wiped out. So there is this sort of survival bias towards the fitter or, you know, more boring banks.
Yeah, there is a survival bias for conservatism in the financial industry. The really innovative players, like Erik said, are usually wiped out in the financial crisis.
And I think maybe 10 years ago or so, many of us in banking, and I was one of them, that was wrong. I feared that we would be taken out by startups that would sort of take banking and kill it altogether. Now, essentially for that reason of the startup bias, it didn't happen. What has happened instead is that the startups sort of act as some sort of frontier, outsourced, non-bank driven development thing. And then if something is really promising, a bank can buy it. But you don't have and I think maybe that's one of the reasons for it. It's very hard to run this startup mentality in a bank. And so you need startups to run startups. And then if they pass a certain hurdle, you can buy them.
Exactly. You have a lot of compliance, regulatory rules that you need to follow. And as a bank, you need to be very trustworthy in your customers' eyes. And like going that like bold and fast is not perhaps the most trustworthy thing to do.
No, there are very few banks. Some banks have been successful in having innovation, try out, you know, fail fast type of operation test lab at an arm's length. But if we look at established banks, they are rare, these examples. So it is more in the startup community where this happens, and it becomes a sort of outsourced, fail-fast, trial and error type of thing.
And many of the startups, they're crying for or want this sort of regulatory sandbox environment where they can have lighter regulation. And it might work as long as you are not systemically important. One of the problems there, problems is actually a good thing. Once a great idea that would sort of exist in a lighter regulatory environment, once they hit a scale where the everyday man, the little guy on the street, starts to use their product at scale, then society and the politicians will come in and protect the consumer. And then suddenly there is no more regulatory sandbox. Then they also have to hire all the compliance people that all the banks have. And that is a cultural step for them. It's very hard to take.
Indeed. What about if we think about legacy? Can it be a strength or even a competitive advantage?
Absolutely. Like we said in the beginning, there is positive legacy and negative legacy. And in some cases, for some corporates, in any industry for that matter, positive legacy can actually be the differentiating factor with your competitor. Imagine a situation where your end products are very similar to that of your competitor. There is a high price competition. Production is quite straightforward and simple. The environment is regulated to a certain extent. There are externalities that hit every player in the industry. Then it can actually be so that positive legacy, let's call it culture, let's call it operation, whatever, can be the differentiating factor. You can steal customers, you can recruit employees, you can replicate technology, but legacy you can't buy, steal, or replicate.
Exactly. If you don't know your legacy, it's probably running your business.